had been standing at this stop for the 3rd hour, and still there was no ill-fated bus. 3 guys who decided to try their luck and catch a passing night transport to the city. Vanya, Sergei, and Nikita have long been tired of living in the village. To tell the truth, the guys wanted to change the situation and radically change their lives. Nikita was the ringleader, of course. Guys, what are you doing? Don't even doubt it, everything will be fine. I've already checked the situation. Let's sign up for the construction team and go ahead. What if it doesn't work out? If I go back, my stepfather will eat me alive, Sergei objected. And my grandfather will take me to the far cordon so that I can sit there all day long in the huntsman's hut. So we need to think about everything again. Vanya supported his friend. And only Nikita ran away from the village just like that, out of boredom. His father was a wealthy farmer and could easily provide his son with a comfortable life until old age. But Nikita wanted more. He dreamed of nightclubs and restaurants, discos, and relaxing to the fullest. Having encouraged 2 of his cronies to escape from the village, he found out the schedule of passing buses, in particular those that followed the route at night. After all, if the guys had decided to sneak out during the day, they would certainly have been noticed voting on the highway. And so, under the cover of night, they will be able to slip out of the house unhindered, without fear that their parents will rush after them. After packing their bags, the boys began to prepare for the night bus, which was supposed to pass by their village around midnight. Are you sure he will? What if we're just wasting time? Asked Sergei cautiously. Nikita smiled. Yes, it will. Don't worry, I've found out the schedule. It will arrive 15 minutes before midnight, approximately, of course. In general, we will need to leave at 11 o'clock, Nikita reassured his friend. Sergei and Vanya exchanged glances, but did not argue with each other. What's the point when Nikita has really studied their future route thoroughly? And now, all 3 of them are standing in the biting wind and waiting for the ill-fated bus. It was close to midnight, but there was still no one on the highway. At some point, Sergei and Vanya began to worry and anxiously look towards the highway. Nikita, on the other hand, behaved calmly and was confident that the bus would arrive after all. As luck would have it, the wind was strong and bone-chilling, which made the 3 guys' teeth chatter from the cold. Closer to midnight, the full moon rose in the sky, looking from a distance like a huge yellow disk. Sergei grimaced. Damn, it's just like in a horror movie. Nikita shook his head. Come on, bro. It's okay. Our bus is coming any minute now. We'll land and be in the city by early morning. As if to confirm his words, faint lights appeared in the distance. Yes, he's on his way, and what did I tell you but you didn't believe? Nikita exclaimed with joy. Sergei and Vanya exchanged glances and thought about the same thing at that moment. After all, they shouldn't have considered their friend a dreamer, because in fact Nikita did everything so that they could escape from this backwater. As the bus approached, the boys saw that it was moving strangely, swaying from side to side, and when the bus was about 50 meters away, Sergei cried out in surprise, Damn, it's some kind of old junk. How old is she? 30? Nikita objected. Vanya just shook his head. Nikita looked at the dial of his wristwatch and swore softly. And the time is exactly the time that was indicated on the route of this bus. Well, guys, if it stops, You'll have to load up. Otherwise, there won't be another one. And I don't want to carry the bags back, so it's up to you. But I'm leaving today anyway. And I probably am too. To hell with these amenities. We'll get there somehow. It's not like we have to travel for a whole day. Well, how far is it to the city? 3 or 4 hours. We'll get there somehow. Vanya supported his friend. When the bus finally pulled up to the stop, the guys saw that the transport looked even worse than they had imagined. It was an old, battered, huge bus with peeling paint and dirty windows that hadn't been washed for a long time. Some nondescript old man in a cap was sitting at the wheel and constantly chewing something. Apparently, it was either chewing gum or something else. Seeing the trio of shivering guys, the driver stopped the bus and kindly opened the doors for them. "Good night. Will you take me to the city?" Nikita asked, trying to be polite, jumping on the bus running board. The driver gave him a contemptuous look and then nodded slightly. At the same time, the old man did not utter a word. At that moment, Nikita involuntarily turned his head to the right and saw that most of the passengers were already asleep and no one really cared about them. After a bit of hesitation, the guy asked, "Hey, Bat, where should we put the bags? In the cabin or in the luggage compartment?" The driver looked at Nikita strangely and then nodded once again. The guy winced. This old guy, what's not mine, can't he answer me properly? Why on earth should I play guessing games with him? I understand that we can enter the salon with bags, right? Nikita asked again, gaining patience, thereby greatly facilitating the task for the old man. The driver nodded affirmatively, which finally confirmed Nikita's guesses. Turning to his friends, he commanded, "So, come on, guys. Let's get in, and I'll pay for the tickets out of my pocket, then we'll settle up." Nikita threw the money at the driver, picked up his bag, and headed deeper into the cabin. Sergei and Vanya didn't have to repeat it twice because they were so chilled that they were ready to climb even into the infernal furnace of the devil himself. Moving along the bus cabin, Nikita could not help but pay attention to the dirt and debris lying under his feet. My God, was it really impossible to put things in order when going on a flight? The goat is old, the guy thought. Nikita was also very annoyed by the fact that there was a very unpleasant smell on the bus. At first, the guy couldn't even figure out what exactly he reminded him of. But when Nikita sniffed more carefully, he immediately realized that this stench remotely resembled the stench of men's socks that had not been washed. For a long time, coupled with a decomposing dog corpse abandoned on the side of the road under the scorching sun, imagining that they would have to travel in such an environment for several hours, Nikita was visibly upset. "Damn it, what is it that stinks here?" exclaimed Sergei, barely stepping onto the last step of the bus. The driver gave him a hateful look, then started the engine. Sergei made absolutely no impression on the passengers, who were either dozing or staring at one point with an absent, uncomprehending gaze. Nikita shook his head in disapproval. Are they all sick here? The bus stinks as if someone has died, but they are sitting as if nothing had happened and enjoying the journey. Since there were only empty seats at the end of the cabin, the three guys settled there. "Yeah, well, the bus pulled up on us, bro," Vanya said reproachfully and covered his nose with his hand. Nikita coughed uncomfortably. "Well, what could I do, boys? I didn't even know that there would be such a mess here." If someone had told me that I would have to travel in such a sponge shower, that I would have run away from the village during the day. The guys nodded in agreement but did not pursue their unpleasant conversation, because they understood that they had already made their choice and were now heading towards a new life. It is not known how they will be received by the city, which still needed to gain a foothold first. Meanwhile, the bus screeched into motion, rocking from side to side and creaking on every bump or bump as it slowly began to climb the long climb. Automatically glancing out the window, Nikita saw the monotonous conditions had improved. Oh, I wish now I could throw fishing rods on the river at dawn, and in the afternoon I can swim if the water warms up well, the guy thought. Sitting in a creaking old armchair, Nikita still did not cease to be surprised by the deathly silence in the bus. As if the passengers who were sitting had already talked enough about everything they could, and now, with unprecedented calmness, they kept nodding off, trying to entertain each other with conversations about everything and nothing. But nothing good came of it. Anyway, at night the body should rest and the person should sleep. Soon, the three of them drifted off to sleep, not even noticing that the bus driver had noticeably accelerated. Now the old Icarus was rushing forward like an arrow, swinging to win the bus race taking place in the deserted desert. The engine of this mangy red monster roared so much that from the outside it seemed like it could explode at any second from overheating. His work at its peak was like the growl of a hungry beast stalking its prey, bleeding and sweating with fear. Soon, heat began to flow from the red-hot engine into the cabin. At first, it was even quite comfortable, which made the guys sitting at the back of the bus warm up and feel almost at home. But then, the temperature in the bus rose so high that it was simply impossible not to notice it. Sweat trickled down Nikita's cheeks when he woke up and realized that his clothes were soaked through from the monstrous heat that reigned in this damn bus. Elbowing Sergei and Vanya, the guy again felt that unpleasant smell, which Vanya whispered with surprise in his voice. Sergei shrugged his shoulders and then looked at Nikita, as if he had just noticed that the heat in no way interfered with the passengers of the bus. These hapless travelers? And, in fact, they are not people. See how they sit in the same position like robots. Surely this of a reality show. We are being filmed by a hidden camera, and this old man deliberately does not talk to the guests so that he can show the whole recording on TV. Deciding to test his theory, Nikita carefully got up from his seat, holding on to the handrails so as not to fall as the bus flew forward like crazy. The engine roared and doused the interior with such heat that it seemed as if a whole bull, along with hooves and horns, could be baked in the driver's seat. Nikita walked up to the nearest passenger, plucked up his courage, and then gently touched him with his hand. At the same time, a large drop of sweat fell from the guy's forehead. He was also very thirsty, as he had never been before. It's understandable it was very difficult to follow the drinking regime in such a hellish bath. To Nikita's sincere amazement, the man's hand felt like it should have been in a normal living person. That is, just as soft and elastic. But it wasn't even that surprised the guy, but the fact that when he pressed his forearm, the man not only didn't react in any way, but didn't even change his position. Still not understanding what was happening, Nikita repeated his attempt to establish tactile contact, which immediately attracted the attention of his friends, who were watching his every move. We've been driving for so long, and even in such heat, We've only been driving for half an hour, and I feel like I've crossed the Sahara on foot, Nikita thought. Realizing that there would be no reaction to his movement from the passenger's side, he began shaking the strange stranger by the shoulders, trying to bring him to his senses. But what happened right after that made him shudder and recoil in horror. After all, the fact was that the shaking of the man sitting in the chair suddenly opened his mouth by itself, which immediately caused a swollen and pus-covered tongue to fall out. At the same moment, Nikita, to his horror, noticed the scraps of tape that had been carefully taped over the man's lips as well as his eyes, so that he looked completely alive. Nikita's breath caught in his throat at the sight of such a disgusting sight, and his heart began to beat like crazy. At the same time, he was still trying to keep his balance, as the bus not only did not slow down, but on the contrary reached some exorbitant heights on a deserted highway. "Guys, they're all dead here," Nikita exclaimed, touching the next passenger. Only this time, he chose a woman as his experimental victim, from whose head the red curls immediately fell all over, was the only one besides them who could be considered alive on this bus. But Nikita couldn't do it, because the driver suddenly began to wobble from side to side, causing one of the corpses to pop out its eyes, hanging on nerve endings like fairground dummy toys. "Hey, Grandpa. Stop the bus. Do you hear or not? What are you doing, you bastard? Stop it. I'm going to call the police now, and you're going to be arrested, you fucking psychopath," shouted Nikita. But his speech made no impression on the bus driver. To tell the truth, Nikita even suspected that, most likely, the old man sitting at the wheel simply did not hear his words, because the bus engine was roaring so loudly that it was simply impossible to shout over it. Swinging the buses from side to side, the cunning old man did not allow the guys to move further along the cabin. And by his actions, the old man caused a wild rocking among the dead passengers, who, as it turned out a little later, were prudently fastened to the seats with transparent garrote harnesses invisible to the eye. By and large, Nikita, Vanya, and Sergei were there, and they were not there again. This was partly caused by the engine overheating to red, hot air from which rushed into the cabin like a raging hurricane in the African desert. Sweat poured down the guys' faces, and the corpses sitting on the seats suddenly began to fill with pus, becoming like huge inflatable dolls. At that moment, Nikita immediately realized what really explained this terrible stench, which he did not like from the first minutes of his stay on the bus. Most likely, the nauseating stench was produced by these very corpses, which began to decompose under the influence of high temperature, filling the cabin with a terrible smell of carrion. But then, who was driving that damn hearse on wheels? Nikita did not know the answer to this question. Now, the main task for him was to get to the driver's cabin in order to find out what was going on here. As the guy realized for himself, the driver of this coffin on wheels was a crazed necrophiliac maniac who filled the bus with corpses and decided to ride under cover of night. Nikita knew that there were all sorts of psychopaths in life, each of whom got his share of pleasure from the things he did on his own. But what surprised the guy the most was that there were no oncoming cars on the highway. However, it was understandable the time of day affected, because it was now well after midnight. Although, according to Nikita himself, some kind of transport still had to be met, and even at such a time. And, since the bus was swerving from side to side, it was bound to get into an accident soon, which would have very unpleasant consequences for the guys. After all, At such a furious speed, this damn bus could simply fall apart. Meanwhile, Sergei looked out the window and couldn't believe his eyes. The scenery on both sides of the road was completely different, and certainly not what it should have been for their region. The area seemed like a desert to him. And where did the highway come from here? Are there really such places in our region? And the mobile network is gone. There's not a single stick in the signal graph. Vanya exclaimed in fright. Nikita ran to the window and shuddered with horror. There was nothing along the road they were currently traveling that could indicate civilization. Oh, the red Icarus, full of rotting corpses, with 3 poor devils on board. To tell the truth, Nikita has never been so scared as he is now. Deciding to get to the driver after all, he got down on his knees and crawled across the floor, since he could no longer walk standing up. I explained this by the frantic rocking of the bus, which immediately threw the guy onto one of the corpses, which seemed to be waiting for his touch to instantly respond with a shower of droplets of pus and other vile liquid, which are full of every dead and decomposing body. Scorching hot air was blowing into the guy's face with a nasty whistle, as if someone had deliberately installed a giant construction hairdryer in front of him. At the same time, Nikita could only guess how the driver who was driving managed to control the bus in such terrible conditions. Nikita had no doubt that the man was alive, because somehow he could drive this car, doing it quite skillfully. Otherwise, they would have crashed a long time ago, crashing into a roadside pole or going into a ditch. Sergei and Vanya did not follow each other, deciding to see from the outside what this would lead to. Nikita, cursing himself, crawled on his knees, mentally chastising the remaining meters to the driver's seat. But when Nikita had only 3 meters left to crawl, he suddenly quite clearly felt someone's strong touch on his ankle. At the same time, an incomparable smell of decomposition came into the guy's face. Trembling all over, Nikita turned around and saw that he was being held by the leg by a dead woman who, during her lifetime most likely, was at least 70 years old. Wisps of grey and sparse hair hung from her bare head, revealing the surface of her skull, where nimble maggots and cadaver worms were already busily scurrying. The old woman smiled nastily at Nikita, which caused the false teeth to immediately fall out of her mouth. Rolling across the floor, she clanked her cheap ceramics one last time and remained lying by the door. Nikita screamed in horror and tried to go back into the cabin, but he couldn't do it anymore because the old woman left her seat and blocked his passage with her obese, flabby body offhand. There was clearly more than 100 weight in the fat old woman. However, the volume was added to her by the fact that she was in the last stage of decomposition when the body was bloated. It can explode like a high-power bee. Homemade bomb. Mumbling with her toothless mouth and splashing pus in all directions, the old woman collapsed into the passage and, slowly moving her limbs, crawled towards Nikita. Realizing that he only needed to go forward, the guy crawled towards the driver's seat, hoping, obviously, to stop the bus and jump out of it with the guy. And if they fail to the perhaps they would have done this earlier, however, with one condition, that the bus was traveling at its usual slow speed and not flying along like a violent hurricane. Therefore, they would not be able to leave the bus on the move even if they wanted to. To Nikita's surprise, the revived, decaying old woman turned out to be quite nimble and nimble. She crawled across the salon, holding out her rotting hands, from which the skin peeled off like gloves at bulls of Tsarist times. Emitting an incomparable stench around itself, the vile creature caught up with Nikita in a matter of seconds and jumped on his back. Only now did the guy feel how heavy this dead thing was. Being filled with pus from the inside, she managed to bite Nikita with just her gums. However, the effect of this was no less eerie, as if she had grabbed him with her false teeth. The old woman's grip turned out to be quite strong, which is why she managed to grab a good piece of Nikita's skin in the back of his head with her gums alone. Bleeding profusely, the guy screamed, sincerely hoping that the boys would come to his aid. Perhaps this would have happened if the rest of the corpses hadn't suddenly started getting up from their seats and heading towards the uncomprehending guys. Sergei and Vanya exchanged glances, realizing that now they would have to fight with the passengers of this dead bus. Meanwhile, the old woman had practically suppressed Nikita's will to resist. Pinning him to the floor with the weight of her body, she intended to bite him with her toothless mouth, which in itself looked very creepy given her pressure and the randomness of the attack itself. Nikita crawled forward with the last of his strength, intending to throw off the cursed growling creature. As he crawled through the cabin inch by inch, he saw something flash under one of the seats. Nikita looked around, because not every normal driver carries a dozen decomposing corpses in the cabin. Unfortunately, Nikita couldn't reach the tire iron handle the first time. Growling menacingly, the old woman pinned him to the floor with her weight, still trying unsuccessfully to bite through his neck. To some extent, the rotten creature even managed to achieve a small success, as it managed to pick up a flap of skin and put it towards itself. Nikita screamed in unbearable pain, and then turned back to face the tire iron. Fortunately, the guy was more lucky this time because the old woman covered him from head to toe with sticky pus, which made him slippery like a dumb worm. The guy jerked his whole body and grabbed the handle of the tire iron. And, inspired by this victory, Nikita hit the instrument backhand. At the same moment, he felt something hot and fetid on his face. Nikita hit her again, and the old woman collapsed on the spot with a nasty wheeze, being fastened to the seat with plastic garrots. The dead man's eyes, as well as those of all his fellow prisoners, were fixed with pieces of duct tape to create the illusion of a normal human gaze. Nikita hit the creature again, although the old woman no longer showed signs of life. At the same time, it was difficult to say whether she was alive in principle, especially considering such a terrible stage of decomposition. At the same time, the dead drove Sergei and Vanya to the back of the salon. Slowly moving towards their victims, the corpses kept falling from the fact that the buses all began to fall apart, like wax sculptures caught in the rays of the bright August sun. Realizing that they had only their hands out of all the means of self-defense, the guys began to tear off the seat lining in order to get to their base and get at their disposal something like pipes or pieces of iron. Of course, it couldn't be called a normal weapon, especially considering that the hungry and decomposing corpses were already reaching for them with their gnarled claws, clearly wanting to satisfy their hunger with fresh flesh. Moreover, unlike the old woman Nikita had killed, they had teeth, and they were in pretty good condition. Therefore, they could clearly inflict more serious injuries than a muttering, toothless creature. At some point, Nikita even decided to go to help his friends, but then, after weighing the pros and cons, he decided to get to the driver anyway. In fact, he did not know where he actually went to his knees and crawled almost directly to the passenger compartment from the driver's seat. He felt uneasy. At that moment, he was ready to see anything but that. But the fact was that there was no one at the wheel, and the bus was traveling by itself. The steering wheel was spinning from side to side, and someone invisible was pressing on the gas pedal. But the dreadful old man wasn't driving. Nikita felt sick from everything he saw. His head was spinning, and yesterday's dinner bubbled in mockery in his stomach. Barely able to hold back the urge to vomit, the guy tried to climb into the driver's seat. But it was impossible to do so because the engine was blowing directly at the brakes when he realized that it was impossible to stop it in any of the nightmares known to man. While Nikita unsuccessfully tried to take the driver's seat, Sergei and Vanya desperately fought off the corpses surrounding them. Kicking one of them, Sergei got stuck knee-deep in the disgusting, decomposing muck as his sneaker came out from the other side in the area of the corpse's spine, simultaneously throwing out the remains of the intestines. Nikita was much more lucky because he managed to tear off a piece of steel plate from the seats, which he immediately began to swing from side to side like a samurai sword. The structure of the corpse's tissue was soft, and upon contact with the iron, it shattered into pieces, causing the guy to have an incomparable feeling of delight. Nikita felt like he was just playing some kind of computer game where he needed to destroy several corpses in a specially designated period of time. The bus seemed to be heading straight for hell. His engine was roaring so hard that Nikita's ears were blocked and his nose was bleeding. Trying to protect himself from the unbearable heat that was being poured over his engine, the guy tried to reach the brake pedal to stop this creepy vehicle. But it wasn't easy to do it, especially at speed. But when Nikita was able to reach it, he realized that the pedals were fixed in one position, meaning they were faulty. Therefore, no matter how much he hit the brakes, nothing happened. On the contrary, the bus flew forward like a possessed red arrow, scattering pus and blood around it. At some point, Nikita caught himself thinking that the bus was living its own life and feeding off either their fear or their emotions, and considering everything that was happening, they had an abundance of both. Meanwhile, using fragments of a steel plate, Vanya managed to bring down 3 dead men, although it would be more accurate to say that 2.5, since he cut one to the waist, which is why he was now crawling on one hand. At the same time, the guy could not understand why some corpses came to life and tried to kill them, while others, on the contrary, behaved quite calmly and still sat in their seats, being strapped to the seats. There was a real chaos in the cabin where everything was covered with pus, remnants of intestines, and even shit that was still stored in these decomposing bodies. Barely restraining the urge to vomit, Nikita could not understand only one thing. Where had gone the same old man who opened the bus door and kindly invited them into the cabin? And anyway, why didn't he say anything and act like he'd lost his tongue years ago? Having gained an insane speed, the bus flew forward, practically not taking apart the road. It was only now that Nikita realized that during the entire journey, they had not made a single turn. That is, in fact, they had already traveled at least 100 kilometers at such a frantic pace and had never turned. But if they had made a turn at such a speed, the bus would certainly have fallen on its side. And all of them, they died in a terrible meat grinder, mixed with corpses into a bloody mess. Tears began to flow from Nikita's eyes when he realized that, most likely, they would not be able to get out of this bus alive. It is possible that in the near future, he himself will become one of these dead men and will sit on a seat tied with wire to the backs. Fortunately, Vanya and Sergei managed to deal with those who tried to influence their lives. Panting and sweating, they looked at Nikita, who was sitting next to the driver's seat, trying to hide from the invisible heat. Realizing what was waiting for them, Vanya screamed in frustration and began hitting the window pane with a steel plate. It is possible that in this way he hoped to reduce the devilish heat that reigned in the bus, because the fresh night air was bound to help them in this. But unfortunately, no matter how much he swung, nothing happened. The glass seemed armored to the guy, which is why the fragment was a mobile trap that followed some route known only to her. Realizing the hopelessness of trying to stop the bus, Nikita decided to approach his friends in order to take a break and catch his breath. But what happened a little later turned his whole idea of what was really going on here upside down. After all, the next moment the bus suddenly braked sharply and stopped in the middle of the highway. He managed to keep his balance and fell to the floor, which was covered in pus and blood. Falling, the guy managed to earn himself a serious injury in the area of his forehead, which caused a wave of pain. Sergei and Vanya visibly tensed up, and then something happened that just stunned them all. The front door screeched open.